Thank you again for coming tonight, and please join me in welcoming Professor Pat Kuhl to the stage.
Well, tonight I want to talk to you about how children learn, how learning changes the brain, and the impact of that information on society. There's been an enormous increase in discussions about early learning in the last decade. The academic world has changed tremendously in the last decade. There's been a revolution in neuroscience. We can now observe an awake human brain while its owner is solving a problem, experiencing an emotion, or listening to a language. And tonight I'll tell you about some of the newest techniques that even allow us to measure the brain of a thinking, operating, alive, awake baby. This began some 10 years ago. A White House conference was organized by President Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and that's partly why we're here. I'd like to explain a little bit about how early learning happens and describe some of the techniques that show that babies learn in ways we never imagined. We can now connect the dots between what you see in babyhood and what you see later in development. Now tonight I'm going to focus exclusively on language development and what it tells us about the brain. So let me start with a graph that illustrates that there's a critical period for learning a language. That curve is good news for the babies and the children up to about 7, and not such good news for us. What you see is a curve describing the ability to acquire a second language. There's something very important going on in early development. The brain of the child is being committed, the neural networks are being committed to the properties of the native language. Until about 6 months of age, babies are what we like to call citizens of the world, meaning they can discriminate the sounds of all languages. It doesn't matter whether they come from Tagalog, French, Russian, or the languages of Papua New Guinea. They can hear all of these distinctions. And that's surprising because you and I cannot. We are simply not able to do that. So a question arises about development. When, in development, do children change from that citizen of the world status they started as to the culture-bound listeners we now are? And the answer is extremely early, before their first birthdays. So here are the data. This is the result of a study done in Japan and here in Seattle on the perception of ra and la. You see these 2 dots for American infants and Japanese infants at 6 to 8 months. They're equivalently good, about 65% correct. Now 2 months later, look what happens. American babies get a lot better at this RL distinction. Japanese babies get a lot worse. So why at that particular time, and what's causing that change in their development? The babies are actually taking statistics on the input that they hear. This important period in development is something we should pay attention to. If infants are capable of taking statistics on language input at this point in development, we should be able to induce learning. You would think that the television, with the audio-visual being so captivating, would produce learning, but here are the data for the kids in the TV condition. There was no learning whatsoever from either a DVD or an audio tape. So it's very interesting that social interaction is important in this learning process. It appears from this result that the social brain might gate the computational mechanisms of learning. The social brain determines when it's worth taking statistics on. Babies are learning by both listening to us and watching us. It's quite an incredible demonstration of the effects of early learning. But it's important that we understand it, that this is how learning works in the early period. Many children are still left behind, and when you try to repair things, to close that preparation gap in school, it's too late. Really, to close the preparation gap, you're going to have to start a lot earlier, when learning is so very important. There's a big difference in the brain of a child who's not had the learning opportunities that others have had. These studies, I think, will demonstrate how very important it is that we pay attention, that all children have adequate opportunity to learn by giving the experiences that they need. 50 years from now, we won't be judged by the children who succeed, but probably by the children who we left behind. So it's very important that this information be understood, that we really see what environments are doing to alter the brain.